بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا ونبي. We'll be discussing the author of the book Risālah al-Qushayriyyah, Abdul Karim ibn Hawazin al-Qushayri, who lived most of his life in Nishapur, and was a keen student of knowledge. And he studied under some of the great shuyukh of his time, Ibn Fawraq, the great Ash'ari scholar, student of Imam Ash'ari, and with him Abu Ishaq al-Sfirani, who was also another student of Imam Ash'ari later. So he developed an immediate taste into Kalam, the issues of Kalam and theology. He was also a faqih. He was a Shafi'i, Usuli, and faqih. He was a mufassir. He was an expert in Islamic Adab literature. He had all the qualifications of being a great master of Islamic sciences. We must position Imam Qushayri and understand the context of his time. That without understanding the context of any author, you won't understand anything about the book he writes. And in this context, we see that Imam Qushayri rahimahullah died in the 5th century. He preceded Ghazali. Ghazali was born at the end of his life. He was not his student, but he came after Imam Qushayri. And we must understand the culture of the time. So if you can imagine this culture, which is difficult to do today, that you had a Muslim civilization that was all Muslim, and everybody in the community everywhere, from North Africa, the Atlantic, all the way to China, were practicing one deen, one religion, and all Muslims were very much into practicing the deen at that time. There might have been a few pockets of people who were not practicing, obviously, and that's just how human beings behave. But the majority of the community would offer salat in Jamaat in the masjid. People would observe all the necessary rites and rituals of Islam. The Bihamid was never an issue. Dealing with interests was never an issue. Being Muslim was never an issue. Wearing Muslim clothing was never an issue. Being hygienic and pure in the homes and everywhere else in the bazaar was never an issue. Staying away from filth and filthy ideas was never an issue. So if you can imagine a community this way, that everybody and anybody who was in Darul Islam at that time were very well-to-do Muslims, in the sense of their Islamic practice was genuine, authentic, and so on. So you didn't have anyone who was not into a sense of piety. Perhaps in the US and maybe one or two other countries in the world, there seems to be a plethora of medical doctors. I'm not saying anything against the profession. I'm just saying that, alhamdulillah, wherever you go, there's a doctor in almost every household in the USA, and everybody is quite normal to have, conversations with doctors wherever you go, with Muslim doctors. Likewise, at that time, it was very common for all Muslim households to have a grand scholar, a scholar who studies the deen, and a scholar who then teaches the deen. And that was the culture. So thousands of Muslims would flock to the lessons are these intellectuals and these scholars and these orators, and that was their culture. That was what they did as their only pastime. Other than the other worldly, mundane pastimes they had, this was their Islamic occupation and preoccupation. So if you weren't a scholar, you were learning. And the level of learning was incredibly high at that time, as I said. This was because there was a Muslim rule, and where Imam Qushayri grew up, there was a Muslim rule, and the Sultan who came in later on, Taghrul Beg, had a great hand in shaping the life of Imam Qushayri, as you will see. So Imam Qushayri grew up at the time and in a civilization where Islam was not just practiced, it was the only thing that Muslims knew. It was the only thing they breathed. It was the only thing they ate. It was the only thing they smelled. It was the only thing that they touched. Now you imagine this kind of culture and this civilization, and you can see now the level of scholarship that this civilization must have produced. So in that community, in order to be a scholar of repute, you had to be not just amazing, but super amazing. In order to be the cream of the crop, you had to do something which others were not doing. And Imam Qushayri, rahimahullah, definitely had the credentials and the accolades. And not only that, but he also had the talent, and he actually did the work. So in that sense, you must appreciate the profound breadth and depth of knowledge of this great author and appreciate what it is he's doing. That being said, Muslim civilizational history was not spared of controversy in terms of theology and other ideas, because if Islam is the only thing you talk about, then you're going to talk about the Quran, you're going to talk about Allah, you're going to talk about the Sunnah Hadith, you're going to talk about other things that are related to all of this, like Ihsan and Taṣawwuf and Sufism and all of that. So the majority of the Ummah was practicing what we know as, very definite Sunni Islam, where Imam Qushayri was. So in that vein, we see that in Imam Qushayri's time, there were certain pockets of Muslim scholars who were Muslim, but they had some heretical views in terms of theology, that theologically they held views that was not in line with the Sunni understanding of Allah, His names, attributes, and the Quran, etc. And there were several splinter groups existing everywhere in the civilization, I would say across at least this part of Darul Islam. So amongst those were obviously the very broad group known as the Mu'tazili, although they were not in power, but they were there. And Imam Ash'ari, who preceded Imam Qushayri, dealt with most of their false ideas and refuted them in a very brilliant way. And Ibn Fawrak and Abu Ishaq al-Isfirani took over the mantle after him. And then that came down to Imam Qushayri. Imam Qushayri was a great theologian, and that is where we must begin to discuss his life. So in his life, as with all great scholars of the past, they always dedicated their spare time to be in the company of people who were higher, which is a unique phenomenon of Muslim civilization, that you always respected your elders and you always held on to people who were ahead of you in understanding and practicing the deen. So in this vein, Imam Qushayri held on to one of his teachers, and that teacher's name was Daqaq. And he was Abu Ali Daqaq, a great scholar of Islam, a great Sufi mentor and teacher. And Imam Ash'ari spent most of his free time in the company of this great saint and this great wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and remain in his company for over a decade. And that is quite mind-boggling that you would spend, after realizing that your education about Islamic law, Islamic theory, Islamic usul and theology and kalam is not enough. You held on to those people who understood ihsan in the community, and that is where the role of Sufis came in. So Imam Qushayri was a dedicated student of Tasawwuf, along with his other academic accolades. And then after Imam Abu Ali Daqqaq passed away, then he held on to another Sufi Sheikh, Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, who was also a great muhaddith. And in the realm of hadith, he was an expert, as many people attest to about his scholarship also. So, Imam Qushayri didn't feel that he had enough in himself to become an independent thinker yet, which is all but non-existent in the world today. Today, you study 1 or 2 books or 1 or 2 years, then you are now the greatest mujtahid on the planet. And if you study, if you go to a Zawiyah with a sheikh for 1 or 2 months, you are the greatest Sufi on the planet. Okay? That was not the case in our times, in the great civilization of Muslims in the past, and we must appreciate that they held on to the mentorship of others who were ahead of them in life, and not only just ahead of them, but they actually forged their thinking. Okay? So today, if somebody, mashallah, has a PhD, say in Islamic studies, and goes to somebody who does not have a PhD in Islamic studies, but he may be somebody who knows something about ihsan more than he does, then most people say, they go, why are you doing this? But that was the norm. Okay, that was the norm. So Imam Ashari in his day was a contemporary of Imam al-Juwayni, who was Imam al-Haramain, the teacher of Imam Ghazali, and he was also a contemporary of Hafiz Abu Bakr al-Bayhaqi, the great muhaddith, the great scholar of hadith, who is renowned in the Muslim world. So he had great company. So it was not somebody who was unknown in the community. His credentials are supreme and superb. A time came when the Sultan of the time in Nishapur, Tughrul Beg, he, for whatever reason, told the people to start cursing the Shias of the region from the minbar. He said, we need to get rid of the Shias from our region. We need to drive them out. So they started that, and at the same time, he then added on the Asharis to that curse. So the Asharis were also now victims of this curse, apparent public curse, and Imam Qushayri, along with Imam Juwayni and along with Imam Bayhaqi, they had to depart Nishapur, and they went on towards Baghdad, where they camped and they served Muslims, and they served their scholarship, and they served others. As I said, Imam Juwayni became the teacher of Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah, who was also in Baghdad. So I think if you understand the times of Imam Qushayri, which I think is a prelude to Imam Ghazali, that Imam Qushayri's book here actually is I would say a blueprint for Imam Ghazali's Ihya al-Ulum-ud-Din. What we must remember is, as I've said just now, that the ulama and the scholars of the time were the thing to be. They were the ones who were closest to the ruling parties and the ruler, the sultan, and they were the ones who held the high offices of the state, and they were the ones who were appointed judges and appointed imams and muftis, and they are the ones who had tremendous influence upon the Muslim community at large. So when you have this status with the Sultan, and you have this status with the general Muslim population, that your word is golden, and whatever you say, people will follow. Okay? But in those days, it wasn't following the way perhaps we might understand today, because most people in the community were students of knowledge. So if there was a person who did not know his foundational sciences, so to speak, maybe at perhaps an average, what you call mufti level of understanding today, then the community will see right through that person, and they would not acknowledge that person as a scholar. They would probably drive him away and tell him to go away permanently. Okay? So the level of scholarship and the bar of scholarship was very, very high. So in this time, there were certain people who supposedly said that they were Sufis. Okay? And we'll discuss the chapter of Sufis and Tasawwuf, inshallah, perhaps next week. But I just want to bring out this point that in that time, as all Muslims are practicing Islam, and all Muslims are very well conversant with Islam, and all Muslims are part of the Islamic civilization, and all of that, all Muslims are into the deen, etc., and all Muslims are debating about Islamic principles and theory and theology and all of that, and tafsir and grammar and everything else that comes along with Islamic knowledge. You had a group of people who then said to themselves that they need to be somewhat disassociated from what is common in Sunni Islam. Okay? So those people did not represent the Sufi orders. And Imam Qushayri primarily wrote this book not necessarily to defend the Sufi tradition, but more so to bring about what Sufi tradition is, and to allow people to judge from themselves what is Sufism, what is Tasawwuf, and how can we still relate to Ihsan today in our community, because there were, as I said, some people who went into the ishq and the love of God and the love of Allah to the degree where they were consumed with his dhikr, and they were consumed with his thoughts, and they were consumed with the wajd and the ecstasy of the hal of the moment and the states that they were in, and sometimes they would forget to do their salat. Which sounds familiar even today. So they then went further, and a small group of people started to say, they started to say that we don't need to really follow the Sharia, because the Sharia is beneath us, and we don't need to uphold the rules of salat and Sawm, etc., because we are in constant ecstasy and constant remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so we are exempt. In fact, we are not just exempt, but we are preferred over other people. And that is what led to, as you can imagine, a lot of grief in the Muslim community, and a lot of scandalous statements against the whole institution of Tasawwuf and so on. So Imam Qushayri, being a theologian of repute, a mutakallim of the great Ash'ari order, he wanted to prove to the ummah that Tasawwuf and Sufis are actually not just people who follow the Sharia. They actually maintain that the Sharia is the most important component of their understanding and of their tariqah and of their love and dhikr for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is on this premise that he writes this wonderful Risālah, this wonderful book on the ins and outs of Tasawwuf and so on. Okay. So this is this book in front of you. And we see that Imam Qushayri rahimahullah, when he came into Baghdad later on, and another sultan came into power, whose name was Arsalan, came into power, and he had this great wazir. His great wazir is none other than the famous Nizam al-Mulk, who became the sponsor of Imam Ghazali later on. So Nizam al-Mulk came, and he stopped all of this, lan and this condemnation and cursing of people from the mimbar, And then he made sure that these great scholars of repute, Imam Juwayni, Imam Qushayri, and other scholars of repute were taken care of, and they were given the stipends they needed in order to promote their teachings and to get people to learn more and more about Islam. In fact, Nizam al-Mulk was criticized for having a budget for scholarships and developing scholarship that almost matched the defense budget. So you can imagine that if you have a minister who says, I want the budget for scholarship to be equal to the defense budget, you probably won't have the US of A. Because this is mind-boggling, that the amount of investments that these early Muslims made into scholarship is simply astronomical. And it is because of those monetary investments that scholars became scholars. If you invest in the brains of people, you'll get geniuses and super geniuses. If you don't invest, then you'll get probably what you invest. And that is just the order of the day today. And unfortunately, post-colonial, I think, Muslim countries and post-colonial Muslim thought, I think, understands this point very, very clearly, that nobody wants to sponsor a scholar. The idea of scholarships for someone, a student of knowledge, is all but non-existent in the Muslim world, except a few people who are, mashallah, kind and generous. But I was that Nizam al-Mulk really turned the tables. And his Sultan, Ar-Risālah, asked him, why are you doing this? Why are you spending the state coffers on developing scholarships? So Nizam al-Mulk said, you have an army in the day. I'm giving you an army of the night. These scholars are the Jayshul Layl. They are the army of the night, because what they do at night and what they do in terms of reviving scholarship, promoting scholarship in their du'as and the dhikr and the ibadat is what keeps your government in power. So you can see the amount of piety. This great, social engineer, you might want to call him, this great philanthropist and this great visionary introduced into the Muslim community. And as you can see, Ghazali is a direct beneficiary of his investments. So if you invest this way, you'll get the Ghazalis of the ages. And also, this was just about the time when Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, rahimahullah, after a couple of decades, came into Baghdad and so on. So that you see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave these people wisdom, that once the state understands the importance of developing scholarship in schools and colleges and universities, then a civilization grows and then it succeeds. Okay? So Imam Qushayri then was blessed with Nizam al-Mulk also, as was his teacher and contemporary Imam Juwayni, and later on, as I mentioned, as a prelude to Imam Ghazali's life and his contributions, Imam Ghazali was also a beneficiary of this great state investment. This is the context that I want to show you, that Muslims of the past lived on a plateau of a great civilization. And the civilization not only appreciated scholarship, they celebrated scholarship. And it is because of that great scholarship that today we still turn back to the classical era of Islam and we study their books, which is what we're doing here. We're studying the Risālah al-Qushayriyyah, which is a book written in the 5th century. Yeah. And today we're now in the 15th century. A millennium later, we're studying the book. What does this tell you about their scholarship? They were geniuses and they were super geniuses, and then we have no resort except to go backwards into our scholarship to find the truth. And herein lies the secret of commentaries on books in the Muslim psyche and the Muslim milieu, okay? Because people usually, they shy away from commentaries of older books and say this historical book, who cares about it? But no, as you will see, or perhaps we can talk about it now, is that a scholar who came later on in Egypt in the 10th century by the name of Zakaria al-Ansari, Shaykh Zakaria al-Ansari rahimahullah, wrote this magnificent commentary on Risālah al-Qushayriyyah, إحكام الدلالة على تحرير الرسالة. So in this commentary, he brings out gems and he brings out points and he discusses the book at length in a very scholarly way. But what Imam Zakaria Ansari did was that he made the book a bit more palatable for the common Muslim, and he tried to dumb it down, so to speak. Okay, dumb it down for the common Muslim of his time, not of our time. Okay? Nowadays, people read Ghazali and they start quoting Ghazali to their husbands and their wives, and they think they're doing a great service. They're not, okay? Because Ghazali didn't write the book for you. Ghazali wrote his book for the ulama of his time, and that is the context we must appreciate. So, in a state-sponsored time, where scholars were close to the Sultan and close to the Wazir, they were getting stipends from everywhere, and they were not in want, and they focused and dedicated all their time into this great feat of developing Islamic scholarship. And you can see they studied and they studied for decades, and then they taught for decades, and so on. So anyway, so this is the backdrop. In this context, you had a few Muslims who thought that they were exempt from following the Sharia, and Imam Qushayri rahimahullah wanted to bring this point across to the mainstream Sunni Muslim audience, that Sufis are indeed not just within the fold of Sunni Islam, but they promote Sunni Islam, and they are, inshallah, the best people from whom you can seek your spiritual guidance and learn how to understand, incorporate, and inculcate your ihsan. Also, on a daily basis, and this is where, inshallah, we will start to talk about the book and read one or two passages, paragraphs here and there from the beginning also, so that we know exactly where it is we are going with this book, this Imam Qushayri's book. Okay, the Risālah al-Qushayriyyah, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is the what we call the Muqaddimah of the book, where the Qāl al-Ustad al-Imam Zain al-Islam al-Qāsim Abdul Karim ibn Hawazim al-Qushayri radiyallahu anhu, alhamdulillah alladhi tafarrada بجلال ملكوته وتوحد بجمال جبروته وتعزر بعلو حديته وتقدس بسمو صمديته وتكبر في ذاته عن مضارعة كل نظير وتنزه عن في صفات عن كل تناه وخسور، له صفات المختصة بحقه والآية الناطقة بأنه غير مشبه بخلقه. This all based on his understanding of Kalam, the Asma and Sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Sunni Ash'ari position that he holds with regards to the divine essence and the divine attributes, and so on. So he goes on and he talks about what prompted him to, inshallah, write this book, and I think we should read him and then obviously quote him so that we know exactly what it is he was saying and what it is he was trying to doing in his time. ثم علموا 2 pages later رحمكم الله أن المحققين من هذه الطائفة انقرض أكثرهم ولم يبق في زماننا هذا من هذه الطائفة إلا أثرهم. So he's lamenting the fact that the true Sufis are very few in his time. They've gone away. The true Sufis have gone away, and there's only a few people who follow their path, that remain in this community today, and this is something that I'm lamenting, and so on. مضى الشيوخ الذين كان لهم اهتداء وقل الشباب الذين كان لهم بسيرتهم وسنتهم اقتداء. That people who were the true leaders of the community, and that they were guiders and guides for the community, they have vanished, and there are very few people who are young people who can now follow their path, outlook towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ibadah, and so on. ثم لم يرضوا بما تعاطوه من هذه الأفعال حتى أشاروا إلى أعلى الحقائق والأحوال وادعوا أنهم تحرروا عن رق الأغلال. And here in this sentence that he says that these people claim وادعوا أنهم تحرروا عن رق الأغلال, that these people have been liberated. تحرروا, تحرير, that they have been liberated, okay, from the shackles of now taqleed, and the shackles of following the deen, and the shackles of the obedience and being a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وتحققوا بحقائق الوصال, and they have now become so well into, so much ingrained, you will say, and annihilated in the ishq of Allah, that they reached Allah. وأنهم قائمون بالحق, and then they are now standing with the truth, and so on. This is how Imam Qushayri rahimahullah starts to bring us to the time, his time, where he's lamenting the fact. So he's a realist. So he's not an idealist. He understands what the problem of the time is, and he's not saying to anybody that this is good or this is bad. He's just saying that this is a matter of fact. It's very cold, and he goes about his business trying to help Muslims understand the Muslims of his time understand the need to understand Sufism through Sunnah and through following the early mashayikh of Taṣawwuf. So this is how he starts this. Okay? So what he does then in the early chapters is that he brings about statements from early Sufis that talk about Tawheed, and they talk about the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they talk about the essence and the foundation of Islam, which is Tawheed. That understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is ma'rifah. The Sufis have this term called ma'rifah, which is recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people say it's knowing, but I think is much more than knowing, is recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, understanding how he exists and how he creates, etc. And he's going to bring some quotes from the Quran, from the Sunnah, from the early mashayikh of the time. When Imam Qushayri rahimahullah is a great advocate of Junaid Baghdadi rahimahullah, who is known as the Imam of the Ta'ifa. He is known as the Imam of the Sufis because he really laid down the foundations of Tawheed, the foundations of Ishq, the foundations of Ibadah for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's going to quote him here and there. He's going to quote his student Shibli, and he's going to quote a few other people. As you can see, we can go and pick and choose some of the quotes and try to, inshallah, analyze them, hopefully very carefully. So we go into the first chapter, في بيان اعتقاد هذه الطائفة في مسائل الأصول, in the issues of usul. Here the word usul do not refer to usul al-fiqh, they refer to usul al-tawheed and usul al-deen. Okay, so in their terminology, usul was all about tawheed, understanding Allah, his names, his attributes, his speech, and how to worship him, etc. This is now an introduction to how we in Imam Qushayri's time understand what is the inheritance that we have inherited from the early Sufis. Okay? So here he quotes his Shaykh, the Shaykh I mentioned, Abu Abd al-Rahman Mohammed ibn al-Husayn al-Sullami. سمعت الشيخ أبا عبد الرحمن محمد بن الحسين السلمي رحمه الله تعالى يقول سمعت عبد الله بن موسى السلامي يقول سمعت الشبلي. Shibli is Junaid's student, Junaid Baghdadi. يقول جل الواحد والمعروف قبل الحدود وقبل الحروف. So Imam Qushayri throughout the book will sometimes explain certain statements where he feels a statement of clarification and explanation is necessary. His methodology is usually the same methodology that Muhaddithun follow. That is, you will start with Wahi Matlu, you bring an ayat of the Quran, and then you follow it with Wahi Ghair Matlu, you'll bring hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you'll bring the aqwal and the statements of other people who have commented on the issue, and then you have your own understanding or your own opinion. So here Shibli rahimahullah says Jalla al-Wahid, that the one who is one, al-Wahid, the one who is one, he is majestic, and then he is known. meaning you can know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through ma'rifah قبل الحدود وقبل الحروف. So Imam Qushayri comments on this saying هذا صريح من الشبل أن القديم سبحانه لا حد لذاته, that the eternal, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as opposed to the non-eternal, that is his creation. And so in Kalam you have this division between the eternal and the non-eternal, the eternal being Allah, the Qadim, and the Hadith, who is now the accident, if you want to call it that. He, or the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has limits, but Allah, the Qadim, he has no limits. لا حد لذاته, there's no limits to his essence. ولا حروف لكلامه, and there's no harf or sound or word to his kalam. Okay, there are no letters there when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks. So he's showing that statements like this prove that the early Sufis were very well oriented with the theology of Sunni Islam. سمعت أبا حاتم الصوفية يقول سمعت أبا نصر الطوسي يقول سئل رويم عن أول فرض افترض الله على خلقه ما هو، فقال المعرفة لقوله جل ذكره وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدوني، قال ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما إلا ليعرفوني. So here Imam Qushayri quotes a Sufi who is making the tafsir of an ayah of the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, and he quotes the famous tafsir of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, in which Abdullah ibn Abbas says that the meaning of liya'budun here in this ayah is liya'rifun. I have not created the jinn and the ins except that they should worship me, meaning that they should recognize me and they should understand me, because when they recognize me, understand me, they'll be worshiping me comprehensively. Okay. This is how now Imam Qushayri develops the idea in the mind of the reader that Sufi knowledge and Sufi epistemology and Sufi kalam, if you want to call it that, although Sufis don't like kalam. Sufi kalam, as I said, if you want to call it that, goes in line with every understanding that we have from the Sahaba. So if a Sahabi who is Hibrul Ummah, the best mufassir of the Quran, if he is saying that in this ayah the word ya'budun means ya'rifun, then we have a precedent in saying that as we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the rituals, our purpose of worship is to recognize him and to become close to him and to realize who he is, what he is, and how he works. وقال الجنيد إن أول ما يحتاج إليه من أخذ الحكمة معرفة المصنوع صانعه. And this Imam Junaid Baghdadi rahimahullah ta'ala anhu saying this wonderful statement that the first thing a person requires in order to have an aqeedah of hikmah and knowledge is that he must know the creation and its creator. Ma'rifatul masnu' sani'ahu. Okay, that the creation must know who its creator is, meaning what is the relationship between the creation and the creator. That Allah is the khaliq and we are the makhluq. So as we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we believe we are makhluq, our actions are makhluq, we are there in front of Allah as the khaliq. And once you have this realization as you are in salat, then when you stand up for salat and you realize you are nothing except a creation of Allah that is bowing down and putting one's forehead onto the ground, and there is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the khaliq, the creator is. So I have no order in order to be someone who is close to Allah, Allah is close to me. So this Junaid rahimahullah summarizes this, that if you're able to realize, not just theoretically, but as a realization and as what we call in Tasawwuf a mushahada, an actualization, that while we are praying in front of Allah, even if it's just 2 rakats, that we believe that we are Allah's creation and we believe we are worshipping the creator, and the creator creates all the time, perpetually, eternally, and that brings us to a state of realization and proximity to Allah that you will not be able to develop with so many other gadgets and so on. So this goes back to the ayah, إِلَّا لِيَعْرِفُونِي, so that they may realize who I am. So in the state of worship, when a worshipper realizes that he is simply a creation of Allah, and Allah can create and uncreate the way He wants to, and Allah can give and not give the way He chooses to, this develops a realization, an actualization of the one who is being worshipped, and this is a way to improve our ihsan with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the state of salat, as mentioned in the hadith of Jibreel. وَالْمُحْدَثُ كَيْفَ كَانَ إِحْدَاثُهُ. And then further on, this is an amazing quote, and we don't have time to explain, but I'll give you a little bit of understanding of this and how this relates to creativity. Okay? That the one who is now created, the muhdath, how is his creation? How does Allah create me? That is a question that Junaid is saying. It is the foundational principle upon which you will understand hikmah, which is divine wisdom. So you stand there, you sit there, you think, how is Allah creating me now? If Allah doesn't create me, I will cease to exist. How is He creating me? And that is a question that the Sufis answer. And that is by saying that Allah creates through His tawajjuh. Allah creates through His focusing on me. When you realize that I am under the focus of Allah perpetually, then that state of proximity is like none other. And that brings you to the level of your understanding ihsan in the hadith of Jibreel. فَيَعْرِفُ صِفَةَ الْخَالِقِ مِنَ الْمَخْلُوقِ وَصِفَةَ الْقَدِيمِ مِنَ الْمُحْدَثِ. So then he realizes and recognizes the attribute of the Khaliq with the makhluk, and then he realizes the attribute of the eternal with the one who is non-eternal, that my existence depends totally on Allah's giving me existence. That is now, he says, فَيَذِلُّ لِدَعْوَتِهِ. So then he humbles himself to call Him, to petition Him, to summon and to request from Him, as being someone who is totally devastated by the realization that I am simply nothing. And that is the purpose of ibadah. يَذِلُّ لِدَعْوَتِهِ وَيَعْتَرِفُ بِوُجُوبِ طَاعَتِهِ. And then after that, he realizes and appreciates the need for him to worship Allah, that it becomes a personal necessity. I am now in a state of understanding that my worshiping Allah is a personal necessity, not a political one, and not a social one, and not an intellectual one. It is personal, that if I want to exist, I need Allah in order for Him to make me exist. فَإِنَّ مَنْ لَمْ يَعْرِفْ مَالِكَهُ لَمْ يَعْتَرِفْ بِالْمِلْكِ لِمَنْ اسْتَوْجَبَهُ. And obviously, the statement here is very clear for those who understand the Arabic. MashaAllah. So if you do not realize and recognize who your owner is, okay, then you will not see ownership where it belongs. So you must realize that your existence is owned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the true message of the Sufis, that the Sufis want to bring people closer to Allah through their ibadah, okay? Not without their ibadah. So the Sharia is a plateau, and you build on this plateau, and then you have the foundation, and you have a house, and you have a roof, and you have walls. You cannot build without a foundation. So Sharia for the Sufi is a foundation for building Islam and Iman and Ihsan. Once you appreciate this, then you will see and realize that Imam Al-Qushayri rahimahullah is not simply quoting these people because of their reputation. No, sometimes people live off their reputation, and they say idiotic stuff, and because of their reputation, people listen to them. That is not the case with Imam Al-Qushayri, that he is bringing the statements of these people because their statements are full of wisdom, of marifah, of gnosis, and recognizing who Allah is. The point of the abid is to realize who the ma'bud is. If you are a worshipper, you must appreciate whom you are worshipping. And if that doesn't happen, then you have to do it again until it does happen. So that is why it is almost psychological, spiritual, intellectual recognition of the abid, the worshipper, in his quest to become close to the one whom he is worshipping, is now through the process of liya'rifun, recognition, understanding, and then thinking, contemplating, reflecting, meditating. These are values that we have no time for. We don't have time for these values. They are non-existent in our culture today. But if you want to be close to Allah, you're going to have to find time to do all of these things, so that you are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. People in the past would offer 2 rakat salat of hajjah in front of Allah, and their needs will be met. The problem there is that you have to contextualize this. And that contextualization is that when they make dua, were they making dua for something that is mundane or something that was not so mundane? Okay? So usually people who have that ability, they usually don't make dua for the mundane. They say that Allah takes care of the mundane the way He does, and they have a sense of responsibility, and they have a sense of tawakkul. Their du'as are for this kind of stuff, that I want to be close to Allah, I want to recognize Allah, I want to see Allah, I want to actualize my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so on. This was their concern, and they would use salat in order to gain proximity and closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nowadays is somewhat difficult. What I'm trying to say is that this is in a time when Islam was the only way of life Muslims knew. Everybody was practicing Islam. Even those who are heretics in the community practice Islam, except these few people that Imam al-Qushayri is targeting. Yeah. So most Muslims, 99% of Muslims, would pray and they would fast and they would give zakat, they would stay away from haram, they would eat halal and all of that. So this is the question was not the normative Islam. The bar of normative Islam was much higher. At the time of Imam Qushayri, Imam Ghazali himself says so, and Imam Ghazali in his Al-Ulum has fascinating statements as to how high the bar of Islam was for the predecessors, meaning the Sahaba and the Tabi'in. He says at one point that people in the olden days would line up outside the Jummah Masjid after Isha to make sure they get a place in the Masjid for Jummah. Now you go figure what kind of culture they lived in. You go to the Masjid just 2 minutes before the khutbah ends, and you do your fard and you scamper out of there. That is not their Islam. They had this affection for Islam, which is unheard of. Religious passion. I don't mean in terms of extremism or what we call nowadays fundamentalism. It was just pure love for devotion to Allah. Now, the whole community was on the page, on the same page, on the same line, on the same syllable. So Imam Qushayri is speaking at a time when this level of Islamic awareness and practice was at a height. Now, when we talk about these issues and values, we're nowhere near there. We live in a different universe. You can't apply those values here today because that is a total misunderstanding and misappropriation of what Imam Qushayri is saying. He is speaking to the people of his time. When we want to commentate and relate this to our time, we have to build a system of thinking that makes it palatable to us, and we can translate that to our time. In our time, it is so difficult to find a group of Muslims in any community who are dedicating their lives to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is just so. Nowadays, if you find yourself that you have a few minutes to think about, maybe before salat, maybe after salat, that how am I realizing my presence in front of Allah? Just for 1 or 2 minutes, not too much, because if you don't, if you want to take out half an hour, 1 hour of your time, you'll be guilty of neglecting your other duties and responsibilities, which are part of Sharia. Then you have to fulfill those responsibilities as part of your suluk. That is what Allah wants from you. But if you find time, and you can make time where you sit down and you think, okay, what is the relationship between me and my Khaliq, me and my Creator, that when I'm in salat, do I actually actualize this reality that I'm simply Allah's creation, bowing down, putting my head on the dirt in front of Allah, who is my Creator, my Maker, and I'm now imploring Him to continue creating me. That's what I'm doing. That is the recognition that Imam Qushayri is bringing forward through the Sufi doctrine and Sufi orientation that is mentioned through Shibli, that is mentioned through Junaid and other people who led the Ummah into the world of Taṣawwuf and so on. So we appreciate what Imam Qushayri rahimahullah has done for the people of his time. When we're translating and commentating on what he did for his time, we do have to find a way to make it easy for us to appreciate what it is he's saying. And I've given you a formula, hopefully, by which you can do that. 2-3 minutes of contemplation, 2-3 minutes of reflection. That, you know, unfortunately, because this virus has made us realize we know diddly squat, and we can do diddly squat. Has totally handicapped us, and that no superpower on the planet can do anything about this situation. They have to rough it out. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's message to the Muslim Ummah, that they must realize who Allah is. Inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. Allah is capable of doing everything at any point of time. This is the way He works. This is how He creates. This is who He is, and this is what He does. So in this time of desperation, we have time through Allah's fadl to think about a few of these things. And the way to think about it is at the time of ibadah, at the time of salat, before, after, or during. Just do what Junaid is asking us, rahimullah, to do. To understand that you are the makhlooq, you are Allah's creation, and the one I'm worshipping is my Creator. And the relationship between the creation and the Creator is one of creativity. Allah's creativity is coming upon me when I'm in sajda. Imagine that, think of that, because it's not just a fantasy, it is reality. And that is the meaning of Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma saying to the Sahaba and to his students that yes, you've established, now alhamdulillah, you do your salat 5 times a day, you do your tahajjud, you have your awrad, you have your dhikr, and you have your psalms, zakat and hajj, and you have everything else that you do in order to maintain Islam and the Islamic civilization. But do you have a realization of who Allah actually is? And that is common for all Muslims at any time, whether it's in the time of Imam Qushayri, or the time of Ghazali, or nowadays, it doesn't matter. That understanding is what's going to revive the love for Allah and the Rasul in the Ummah. Without this realization, then there is no ihsan. And ihsan means beauty. And if we do not beautify our Islam, and we don't represent Islam and Allah with ihsan, then we will not be representing Allah and Islam with ihsan. That's just the bottom line. So we see Imam Qushayri rahimahullah having a deliberate message that is timeless. So that's the bridge. That the message Junaid is giving, and the message Shibli is giving, and the message Imam Qushayri is giving is timeless if we appropriate the doctrine to ibadah. And every Muslim has to pray 5 times a day. So why not pray in such a way that makes a difference to us as people who pray. For those who don't pray, they should pray. Those who are praying, they should definitely help themselves and help their prayer by excelling in their prayer, by just thinking just one or two, not that difficult, and it's not too much to ask for, even nowadays. Nowadays, we have much more time than we had before, but we must now take advantage of what Imam Qushayri is saying, that in the world of Taṣawwuf, the Sufis came to help all Muslims, especially the scholars, become closer to Allah. And it doesn't matter where you are in life. You could be a shepherd, you could be a farmer, you could be a trader, you could be someone who has high office, you could be the ruler, and you can be a great faqih and alim and mutakallim. And that was the role of Imam Ghazali, who came just a few decades later, and he wrote Ihya Ulumuddin to show us exactly what Imam Qushayri was saying and what he did for the ummah. And it is with this, inshallah, that we conclude today's dars. Next week, inshallah, we'll be doing the chapter on Taṣawwuf. You can read up on it if you want. You can think about the quotes that Imam Ghazali, Imam Qushayri, rahimahullah, brings into the book. But you must be careful that sometimes those statements might seem very paradoxical. So if you're confused, then don't make a conclusion. We'll try and help you relieve the confusion, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. We make dua Allah accept us all. Allah gives us tawfiq to become closer to Him through ibadah and through ihsan. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala khayr khalqi Muhammadin wa alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.